We continue now at the top of Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis in Meseches Nazir. This is Nazir Daf 12b. The Gemara is in the middle of explaining our Mishnah. In the Mishnah, a person says, I'm going to be a Nazir, and I'm also going to bring Karbanos on behalf of another Nazir. And the Mishnah seems to indicate that works even if he brings the Karbanos on behalf of a person who becomes a Nazir after he had made that statement. And the Gemara explains why. Elahachi Kamar. Rather, obviously, the Mishnah means to say as follows. Imashkachna dahavin Nazir. If it's found that such a person will be a Nazir, meaning if there is a Nazir available even at a later point in time, agalche, so then I will shave him, meaning to say I'm going to bring the karbanos on his behalf. And again, what that means is that our Mishnah indicates when a person makes this kind of declaration that I'm going to bring the karbanos on behalf of another Nazir, that other Nazir doesn't have to be a Nazir right now, even if it turns out he's a Nazir later. And so the Gemara says this should apply also when it comes to being Mekadesh a woman. Hachanami here also, when a person makes a shliach and says, you are a shliach for me, please be Mekadesh a woman, it doesn't necessarily have to mean that that woman has to be available at the moment he appointed the shliach. Hachanami here also, Hachikamarle, this is what he's saying to the shliach. Imashkachas de migrasha, if it is found that there's a woman who, let's say, is right now maybe married, but she's divorced a little later on, Kadishli, be Mekadesh her for me. And so therefore that will be a question on what Rava said on the previous Amud, because Rava said in the previous Amud that according to Rabbi Yochanan, if this person can find a woman who has no direct relatives, so he knows he's not married to any of her relatives, and even if she has a sister, but that sister at the time that he had made the shliach, that sister was married, so it couldn't be that the shliach would be Mekadesh her, then he could marry this other woman because he knows he's not married to any of her relatives. But the problem again is, maybe he is married to her relatives, maybe he's married to her sister, because maybe the shliach went ahead and was Mekadesh the sister after the sister got divorced, because we see a person could make a statement going on some future scenario. Just because he told the shliach to be Mekadesh a woman, it doesn't have to be a woman who's available at the moment that he appointed the shliach. But the Gemara says no, there's a difference between the case of the Nazir in our Mishnah, being Mekadesh a woman. Amri, they answer, Lo majvi in a shliach. When it comes to shlichus, in our Mishnah it's not shlichus. In our Mishnah it's just a declaration, the person upon himself an obligation. But when it comes to shlichus, a person does not appoint a shliach, Ella b'milsa dematzi avid hashta. It's only on something that he can do right now. Right now, marry a woman who's available at this moment. B'milsa de lo matzi avid le hashta lo mashvi. But when it comes to something that can't be done at this moment, let's say a woman becomes available later on, but the shliach wasn't appointed for that particular woman. But Gemara continues below, but is that not really the case? Is the shliach not appointed for some later scenario? I'll bring a proof. Tashma, come here, the following proof from a brisa. Ha'omer la'apetropos shalo. Let's say a person says to his apetropos, the apetropos is taking care of all of his affairs, and he says to him, Kol nedarim shetidor ishti mikan ad sha'avo mimakom ploni. Any neder, any vow that my wife makes from now until I come from a certain place, so haferla, you should annul that vow for her, v'haferla, and then he goes ahead, this apotropos goes and annuls the vow on behalf of the husband. So yachal yumufar, and I might think that's effective and the vow is annulled. Talmud Lomer, the pasuk says, Isha yikimenu v'isha yifeirenu. It's her husband who is the one who upholds the vow. It's her husband who annuls the vow. Divrei Rabbi Yoshia, that's Rabbi Yoshia's opinion, meaning Rabbi Yoshia is saying, because of the pasuk, we see that you can't appoint a shliach to annul the vows of your wife. Rabbi Yonasan Omer, but Rabbi Yonasan says, Matzino b'chol makam sheshlucha shaladam kamoso. We find all over the place that a shliach of a person can act as his agent, and so therefore, yes, a person can have a shliach annul the vows of his wife. And the Gemara says, the only reason why the shlichus might not work over here is because of the pasuk. Because the pasuk says her husband is the one who upholds the vow. Her husband is the one who annuls the vow. Halav hachi, but if not for this, apotropos mefer, then an apotropos would be able to annul the vow. In other words, if not for the pasuk, you can appoint a shliach to annul the vow. Now the problem is, v'ilu gabi didei, whereas by himself, the husband himself, so it's not so clear that he can annul future vows in this way. Tanya, we learned in a brisa, ha'omer le'ishto, if a person says to his wife, kol nedarim shetidori, mikan v'yat shavu mimakom ploni, all nedarim that you vow from now until I come from a particular place, yehu kayam. And so if he says they should be upheld, lo amar klum, that's nothing. But harehin mufar, now if he says they should be annulled, so it's a machlokes. Rabbi Eliezer omer mufar, v'chachamim omer meino mufar. Rabbi Eliezer says the annulment is good, and the chachamim say the annulment is not good, meaning he himself at this moment, when he's appointing the shliach, according to the chachamim, he couldn't annul these future vows, and yet it seems to be that he can appoint a shliach to annul these future vows. And that's what the Gemara says. Right now we think. Kiyomer Rabbi Yoshia, Aliba de Rabbanan. Rabbi Yoshia was speaking according to the Rabbanan, meaning Rabbi Yoshia was saying the shliach is not able to annul the vows because of the pasuk. That's according to the chachamim, meaning the chachamim who say the husband himself cannot annul the vows. The only reason the shliach cannot annul the vow is because of the pasuk. Otherwise, the shliach could annul the vow. That's what we mean to say. Kiyam Rabbi Yoshi aliba derabbanan da amri lo matzi meifar. It's going according to the rabbanan who say that in general the husband is not able to annul the vows in this case. V'lav damar rachmani isha yikimenu v'isha yiferenu. And if not for the pasuk which said isha yikimenu v'isha yiferenu, apotropos have a meifar. The apotropos could annul the vow. So you see that a person could appoint a shliach to do something which is not available to him at this particular moment. But the Gemara says it's not necessarily a proof. V'dilma aliba de Rabbi Eliezer. How do you know that? Maybe Rabbi Yoshi is following Rabbi Eliezer. To Amar Motzi Mefer, because Rabbi Eliezer said that the husband could annul the vows at this moment. He could say that all the vows that you make from now until I come from a particular place are going to be annulled, and so therefore maybe only according to Rabbi Eliezer, shlich is possible as well. But the Gemara says, 1 second, if so, if the husband is able to annul the vows right now, all these future vows that the wife is going to make from now until he comes from a particular place, why is he even appointing a shliach? Let him just annul the vows himself directly. Obviously, it's something he cannot do, and that's why he's appointing a shliach to do it. But the Gemara says to that, no, kasavar, because the husband thinks to himself, Dilma mishtalina, or resichna, or mitridna, maybe I will forget, maybe I'll become angry, maybe I'll become occupied with something else. The husband is afraid that he might not do it, that's why he appoints a shliach, but it is possible that the husband in theory could do it directly himself. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Harei alai legaleach chatzi nazir. Let's say a person says it's upon me to shave a half a nazir, meaning he takes upon himself the obligation to bring half of the karbanos on behalf of another nazir. Mishama chaveiro, and his friend here is V'yamar, and he says, V'ani alai legaleach chatzi nazir. It's upon me also to shave a half a nazir. So zem megaleach nazir shalem, v'zem megaleach nazir shalem. This one has to shave an entire nazir, and this one has to shave an entire nazir, meaning each one has to bring all the karbanos of another nazir. The idea is there's no such thing as a half a nazir. Divrei Rabbi Meir. That's Rabbi Meir's opinion. But the Chachamim say no. Zem megaleach chatzi nazir, v'zem megaleach chatzi nazir. This one shaves a half a nazir, and this one shaves a half a nazir. Meaning between the two of them, they can bring all of the karbanos of a different nazir. And the Gemara says, Amar Rava says, Hakol modim. Everybody agrees. Kol heicha de Amar chatzi karbanos nazir alai. Anytime the person says half of the karbanos of a nazir are upon me, so chatzi karban maisi. He brings half of the karbanos of the nazir. And let's say he says karbanos chatzi nazir alai. Let's say he says the karbanos of a half nazir are upon me. So then kulei karban ba yesuya. He's got to bring the entire karbanos of the nazir, because again, there's no such thing as a half a nazir. My time, what's the reason? Dalo eshkecha naziris lapalga. We don't find the concept of naziris that it goes halfway. And so what's the machlokas in the Mishnah? V'chi pligi belishna demasnisin pligi. And what are they arguing about? They're arguing specifically about the language that's being employed in the Mishnah. Rabbi Meir holds, Kaven de Amar Harei Olai. Once the person says Harei Olai, in other words, the person in the Mishnah said Harei Olai legaleach chatzi nazir. When he says that first part of the statement Harei Olai legaleach, so we take that first part seriously. Echayev akulei karban naziris. He's now chayev from at that moment on bringing an entire karban, the entire set of karbanos for the nazir. V'chikamar chatzi naziris, and when he then finishes off the statement and says Harei Olai legaleach, he finishes with chatzi nazir. So lav kol kamine. That statement is not worth anything. He can't say a half a nazir. There's no such thing. For Rabbanan Savri, but the Rabbanan say no. Neder upesach imahu. The Rabbanan say no. When he says chatzi nazir at the end, so that's like making a neder and then also attaching an opening to it, meaning he's qualifying the original statement. Harei olai legaleach. Yes, the original statement on its own meant he's bringing the entire karbanos of a nazir. But then when he says chatzi nazir, so then he's qualifying the statement and he's saying I'm only bringing half of the karbanos, and that's why the Chachamim say he can bring just half of the karbanos. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Hareini Nazir l'cheshayia libein. Let's say a person says, I'm a Nazir when I have a son. V'nolid lo bein, and then he has a son. Harei's a Nazir, so he's a Nazir. Nolid lo bas tumtum v'androgonus. Let's say he has a daughter. Let's say he has a tumtum, which is somebody we can't identify if it's a male or female, or an androgynous. An androgynous has signs of both male and female. So then Eino Nazir. So then he's not a Nazir because the condition has not been fulfilled. Im Amar kishayia li Vlad. Now let's say instead of saying bein, a son, he says when I have a Vlad, when I have a child. So then afilu nolid lo bas tumtum v'androgonus. Even if he has a daughter or a tumtum or an androgynous, Harei's a Nazir. The individual will be a Nazir, and we'll continue this discussion in the next video on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph.